A deep dive into gluten, what it is, who shouldn't have it, and why that's a sticky subject.
Don't get me started.
This is Straight Talk About Smart Food, a podcast about that fascinating place where food and science intersect. Welcome to Straight Talk About Smart Food. I'm Rachel Matasic, Senior Scientist here at MGP Ingredients, and I'm joined by...
I am Sarah Gudkowski-Fisher. I'm the Food Technology Manager.
And Jen Dunn Carlson. I'm another Senior Scientist here at MGP.
So we're here to talk to food scientists about food science stuff. As food scientists, I think we can get really passionate about things. We've seen a lot of new products hitting the market that are gluten-free. There's a rise in these products, and we get the question a lot, is gluten bad?
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah, so is gluten bad? What is gluten too, I think as well. So, Jen, do you think gluten's bad?
No. Like the short answer, right? No. I don't think, I think it gets a bad rap, in my opinion, right? I think gluten has really good things about it, especially when you're talking in food products and food product development. So no, I don't think it's bad. Do I think it's the perfect thing for everybody? No, I also don't think that, right? So there's the push-pull with it. Like I full-throatedly, anytime anyone asks me, do I think wheat or gluten is bad? I'm like, no.
Mm-hmm. Gut reaction, no.
No, right? Like a short answer, no. But I do know that there's more nuance to the argument, and I think that's interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I know it's like 1% of the American population has celiac disease, so they should be
a 1.5 to 2, yeah.
And then another percentage is gluten intolerant,
Mm-hmm,
but then there's some, if it's medical or self-proclaimed gluten intolerance, but then there's like 30% of the American population that's avoiding gluten. And we've seen that this number fluctuates. This year it's going down. It's previously been higher. And so there's a lot of people that think that gluten is kind of the culprit for these diets and like why they're going to follow this gluten-free diet because they see relief of maybe their IBS symptoms or their arthritis. And I think, Jen, you have some opinions about why you think they're seeing some relief from these following gluten-free diets.
Yeah. So like as you're removing gluten, right? Most people when they're doing these restrictive diets, it's not just gluten they're eliminating from their diet. They're usually like, especially when you're talking IBS or even with arthritis, a lot of times, or even any autoimmune disorder, a lot of times they'll be like, well, try a low FODMAP diet. So that's like, I always forget all of the acronym, but it's like fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polyols, right? And so that comes from a host of stuff. And gluten is one of those, like wheat in general has fermentable things in it. And it has a lot to do with the gut bacteria, more so than just like the gluten in the wheat, right? And when you're on a low FODMAP diet, it's not just that. You're eliminating all sorts of stuff like garlic, onion, just beans, kale, lots of things that have fermentable things in your gut. So it's not just wheat where you're getting some relief.
Right. And also just for where gluten is from, like sources, gluten isn't just in wheat. It could also be contaminating during processing to other sources, like sometimes oats might be contaminated with it.
Oats get a bad rap.
Right. But otherwise there's, facilities that they make sure that they're not contaminated with those other types of allergens. Triticale, did I pronounce that one?
Triticale.
Oh, okay, that was it. Thank you. So that one also could have that gluten in it. What else is it? Barley and rye.
Is a big one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think some of my favorites are whenever I buy a yogurt that really says on the front in big letters, gluten-free.
Thank
or
goodness.
Just
that
my
gluten-free
oranges.
milk.
So it's important, I think, to know where to identify where gluten is and where it's not.
Definitely not.
So I think we had talked previously, Jen, you had a friend that is gluten intolerant and now has to avoid beer.
Yeah, that one kind of sucks too, because like beer, like they're getting better. The gluten-free beers are getting better. They are, but man.
Do you know what they're made from?
Oh, well, I mean, the adjuncts you use vary a lot, right? And even in Dom draws, that you're seeing like corn is a big one. That's
Okay.
definitely gluten-free. A lot of them tend to be rice. I've seen sorghum. But like, as long as you're not using barley or wheat as an adjunct, which they do in some beers, then then it's definitely not gluten-free. But barley malt is one of the, primary flavorants. So that's where I think when you talk about typical beer flavor, usually it's from the barley malt.
I do like beer.
And usually for that population, like that around 2% that are avoiding gluten because, they talk to their doctor, they had tests done, they know that they're not supposed to have gluten, like celiacs. It makes sense because it's where it's autoimmune disease, and so it causes their immune system to damage their small intestine. Yeah, so that makes sense why they wouldn't consume gluten because that would really cause a lot of discomfort. And then also,
like-
also then they can't absorb a lot of nutrients as well. So
Micronutrients.
so that makes
Yeah.
sense why, right, celiacs would stay away from gluten. But some of those gluten-free products out there, while I'm happy that they're out there for those who have celiac or gluten intolerance, but
And they're improving.
Yeah, they're improving, and that's great because there's awesome food scientists working on those products. But it's just where it is kind of hard because they're trying to use like almond flour and other types of flour, rice flour that just don't have that functionality like gluten does from wheat, especially because gluten. Let me pull up. I have some bread
Your
to
picture
explain
perfect
this.
bread?
Yeah,
Let's
to
see.
explain this. I work better with props, so so I have a slice of bread that I made, and it's actually keto bread
Oh.
too. So
So high
2
protein.
grams, 2 grams of net carbs too. So I make that with our Arise wheat protein isolate. So that protein, it's like gluten, but it's more of that starch is washed away. So it's a higher protein content. It's an isolate now. And also our FiberSim, dietary fiber, it's that starch to have that structure. But that gluten is really helping out to stabilize that structure. So it helps out with that extensibility and also elasticity that you don't see, or it's a lot harder to mimic in gluten-free products.
So, Sarah, I have a question.
Yes.
Because I know that our Arise and our FiberSim products are considered low FODMAP.
Yes.
So, would this be a product that people doing a low FODMAP diet could eat?
So that's actually where I would have to send off this final product for testing and for that to be certified the low FODMAP. You can't just look at each individual ingredient. You have to do testing of that final product. And that kind of also leads into if someone were to make like a gluten-free product, then you have to look at those claims as well. So those claims would be you have to have gluten under 20 parts per million. So under 20 ppm
Very low.
to be, right, gluten-free product.
Isn't there two where like the FDA limit is 20 ppm, but then there's one that's actually like certified gluten-free? Isn't that less than 10? Isn't there one that's less than 10?
So there's always different certifications out there, just like you have non-GMO project verified. So you can have that little butterfly on there.
My least favorite is that's butterfly.
Is that because sometimes it's harder, like there's more paperwork and things you have to
Yeah.
do as a scientist, right?
Yes, and I think sometimes the sourcing on this is definitely a topic for a different episode, but like when you talk non-GMO project verified, it's like honey, for instance, right? This one is the one I get the most like.
Yeah,
'cause it's
don't
like-
get me started.
Right? 'Cause like it's not even just that the honey itself has to be from like non-GMO bees, but it's like the pollen they collect the honey from, like for the honey has to be like also from non-GMO crops. So there's like when you have non-GMO honey, you have to like have your beehive such that it's some ridiculous radius too, like 50 miles. It has like 50-mile radius or something like that where the bees cannot collect pollen from GMO crops.
Right.
I literally did not know this.
It's
That's crazy.
irritating. That's what it is.
Also, I'm not sure if you guys knew just how many people can define gluten correctly. A study was done, it was only 8% of the people who were in this study. Whole Grains Council, 94% eat gluten some or all the time, 5% avoid it. Back in 2021, it was 8% avoid it, so going down. But it's also just a lot of people don't understand what gluten is. So who
So
wants
are
to?
you going to tell us what gluten is?
No, I want Jen to explain this one. It's pretty fun.
Gluten isn't actually a protein on its own, right? It's two proteins. There's glutenin and gliadin. And together, by their powers combined, right, they form gluten as a network. And you see it when they start interacting together in bread. Like, I don't know if you've ever done like the window on the bread, like when you wash the flour and you make a paste and wash it, you can eventually like stretch out this really disgusting looking ball, but you can actually see the spider web of the gluten network. And they call it a gluten network because it's the two of them working together.
Some may call it disgusting. I call it beautiful. It's just a little sticky, you know?
Sticky.
That's okay.
Yeah, I don't do sticky.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, texture is a huge thing, and really how you're feeling it throughout the processing steps, how to, help out with that dough handling. And so that's where the Arise wheat protein isolate, you should try putting that into more products because it really helps out with that dough handling, reducing mix time.
Stickiness.
Yeah.
Gluten is the only plant protein that I know of that has that property to make this like 3D glassy window structure and have that in baked goods, which is what
Right,
I
which
think is so unique.
Yeah, and that's why it's like basically ubiquitous in baked, like yeast leavened bread, right? And it has that ability to capture air.
Yep. The gas cells definitely are supported from that gluten network. It is just awesome.
As we saw in Sarah's picture, perfect bread over
Yes,
here.
exactly.
Look
The
at
bread
crumb
again.
structure.
Yes.
So even.
Moisture retention, volume. What
Yeah.
else? Oh, also, if you're comparing like just normal bread to gluten-free bread too, I think that when you're purchasing this gluten-free bread, you're going to be doughing out more money or dough. Doughing
like
out
your
more
pun there.
Yeah.
Shelling out some more dough.
Yeah, yep, shelling out some more dough, yes, with that gluten-free bread. It is more expensive,
is.
because it takes a lot more research, more expensive ingredients too, potentially.
I
it
would
really
say
depends.
that's true. Wheat flour
Yeah.
is relatively inexpensive, right? When you start talking about the alternatives,
Yeah.
especially when you get like tapioca, which isn't particularly grown in the U.S. or that have
Supply.
that import cost. Yeah, or like almond flour. I don't know when almonds have never been cheaper than wheat.
Yeah, it's really interesting as food scientists that not only do we understand that functionality of all these ingredients, but at food companies, we're really putting on a lot of hats. We got to think about what is the price of this ingredient? What's the functionality, the quality of it over time.
Yeah.
The nutritional value.
Exactly.
You have to
Especially
kind
when
of
you-
wear everything, which is, I think, fun for a food scientist.
Right.
Sure. Well, and I think that's why most people, like when you start talking to your family, right, all of a sudden you're their doctor, you're their nutritionist, you're their everything. I'm like, no. I know a lot about food, but please don't make me prescribe your diet. That's no.
It's funny, my mom, speaking about gluten-free, she sent me the other day a picture of her freezer squash, and she said, this didn't used to be gluten-free before, and now it says gluten-free. Should I be worried? It's the same squash.
No.
They're just, now it's being tested and certified as gluten-free.
Yeah. Oh my
so
gosh. I think it was Chex, right? They, the rice Chex have always been gluten-free because rice is gluten-free, right? But they put gluten-free on the box, right? This was way before gluten-free became a popular thing. And they gained so much market share because all of a sudden this was like a gluten-free snack for your kids. And I was like, that was literally a packaging change.
Yeah.
But it's also good that people can see that, and if they do need gluten-free, then they can feel just more at ease too.
Right, and I think that's, I don't know if it's a failing or just like where that education about ingredients is so important, right? Like as food scientists, we know there's only a handful of ingredients that naturally contain gluten, and then the rest is like usually cross-contamination.
So oats.
Yeah, oats is a big one, yeah.
But we're seeing a lot more oat products now that are being certified
Yeah, so
gluten-free.
the cross-contamination comes from the fact that the grain silos are purpose for both, right? And if you've ever seen like a non-flaked wheat berry and a non-flaked oat kernel, they look similar. They're both grasses, right? So they're used in, the silos are used interchangeably. So it's difficult to separate them out entirely.
Yeah, so always important to really look at the labels if that is something that, like celiacs, they know more about that, where the gluten is coming from. There's others with gluten intolerance. There's also some studies and research about those with gluten and arthritis, and it's really just kind of going through grad school, more research is always needed. That seems to be always the end of
The
your
answer to
thesis or your
everything.
conclusion. You're like, more research is needed.
Always.
Well, that's why it's called research.
Exactly. That's what we were taught too.
Search and research.
Yes, exactly. And so it's some people think that there is a link between celiac disease and inflammatory arthritis. So especially those with rheumatoid arthritis, and they might be at a greater risk of developing celiacs.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, however, it's really just that you got to talk to your doctor, changing just one thing at a time to make sure that what is the real culprit. And also the biomedical community is under consensus, apparently, that they don't support gluten-free diet to control arthritis, except, of course, celiac, gluten intolerance, and of course it always comes with that caveat again, more research is needed.
So we can determine gluten isn't always the villain, but are there some health benefits to including gluten or wheat or whole grains in your diet?
Yeah, the nutrients, the protein that you're getting from it.
The functionality for
Yeah.
me, like, is always coming
In an
back to that.
application.
Yeah, I was going to say, it makes my
Application.
life a lot easier.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's like you
It
talk
tastes
about
yummier.
Yeah, well, or like the protein content in your application that you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
If you're making a baguette loaf or like a super dense bread, you're going to use a protein content that's different than if you're making a cake or pastry. Now, if you're celiacs, of course, you're probably not going to be eating either the bread or the pastry, but you're looking at there's protein functionality there as well, even in your application.
Well, I think we can all agree here in our pod that we like gluten. There are reasons, though, that we've talked about today to avoid gluten. So I appreciate you guys coming to Straight Talk About Smart Food to discuss this with me. And it sounds like we have a lot of other topics that we could get real passionate about. And so I look forward to a lot more episodes here doing a little bit more straight talk about different smart foods.
Ooh.
So thanks for coming to the pod.
Thank you.
Thank you. MGP's food scientists are here to solve your culinary challenges. Contact us to discuss how we can help provide delicious solutions for you. Go to mgpingredients.com and click Contact Us.
This content is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as, nor is it a substitute for, professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding your diet, health, and/or medical condition.